Hello, I'm Hannah and welcome to my podcast, Don't Tell Me to Relax, the antidote to unhelpful fertility information. I'm a fertility acupuncturist and educator, and this podcast aims to empower and inform you about your menstrual cycle and your fertility. It's basically all that information you didn't get in sex education at school, with the aim of helping you improve your reproductive health and increase your chances of conception. I'm back again with my lovely co-host Katie.
Hello.
And with this episode, we are going to be having an overview, a kind of chat around the menstrual cycle and what really the menstrual cycle is for. We're going to look at why it's important for your health and why it's important for your health at all different stages of your life. We're going to look at why it's important for your fertility, and we're going to have a little look at what problems to look out for if you're trying to conceive. But we're not going to go into those in too much detail because we will go into them in a lot more detail further on through the episode. So, Katie, let's start off with a bit of biology, because when it comes to female biology, I mean, I think we've talked about this before between us around this idea that when I think of biology from school, I've got tadpoles, I've got the life cycle of a tadpole, I've got cutting an eyeball of a cow.
Oh, no.
Did you do that?
We had some interesting dissection things because
my
school had a farm attached to it.
Oh my God.
We had to do agriculture lessons. And,
I don't know where this is going to go, Katie. I
don't know if you want to keep it in or not, but it cost them money to have any livestock taken away that had died. So they would freeze it and use it in dissections. So we had a lamb that was being defrosted for us to dissect.
I had no idea where this was going when I asked that question.
Yeah, and they couldn't get it to defrost, so I don't know what they did with it, but it came out steaming, and then we dissected a lamb. So
okay, when you weren't dissecting lambs at your school, did you do anything around your menstrual cycle? Or biology, female anatomy? Did that come into it?
No, we did a lot of detail on the digestive system, so I could tell you all about that.
Okay, yeah.
But that was about all the human biology we did. Otherwise, it was all about like chlorophyll and leaves. And
so tell me, since training in reflexology, because I guess you cover it in that. I know I did a little bit in acupuncture, but really I learned most when I was doing my fertility awareness training. What bits of biology stick with you that you didn't know before, like about fertility or about female anatomy? What's your best? Because there's some good stuff out there.
Yeah, there's so much. So this is more like fertility biology as opposed to just female. But so when an egg gets fertilized by a sperm, if there's any damage to the sperm, so sperm can not be of like top quality, and the egg has the ability to repair some of that damage when fertilization happens, which is just like incredible. It can detect that there's an issue, and then it can fix it, and it's just like, what? So yeah, women doing all of the legwork again.
Exactly, women sorting out the crap from men.
Yeah.
Massive generalization, but it is an amazing bit of biology.
Yeah. Have you got one for us?
Yeah, I like the vagina in bit, because I don't know about you, but the word vagina and what it refers to, I have been using incorrectly for many, many years. And in fact, I tell you what I really, really hate, and this is just a personal thing, but I hate the kind of when people struggle with the word vulva. So just to pedal back, vagina is in, so anything that inside, and vulva is the outside, so anything outside is you refer to as the vulva. But what I really hate when we're talking about female anatomy is the words like foo-foo, or you're like, yeah, or you're fairy. I just think, just call it a vulva. Call it a vulva. If there's any issue on the outside, it's an issue with the vulva. If there's any issue on the inside, it's an issue with the vagina. And I know people really struggle with those words, don't they? Those words, the actual words themselves, people find them difficult to use. And so we come up with all this different terminology, which I don't think serves us when we're trying to, if you've got problems with your vulva, with the outside, with the lips or any of the clitoris or anything like that, you know, if you're referring to like, I don't know, your sprinkle or whatever, it's not helpful for diagnosis.
Your sprinkle.
You know, like, I just can't.
Or when people like mouth it and they'll be like, no, like it's just like, just say it, it's fine.
We just need some like hardcore simple facts about this is what the anatomy is, and you know, let's just call it, say, vulva, vagina. So they're mine. Vagina in, vulva out.
Love it.
I might have that on a t-shirt. That might be
my
new t-shirt. Vagina in, vulva out. Yes.
Have like vagina in on the front, like
vulva out on the back. Yes.
What's Vivo?
Yeah. If you know, you know. If you know, you know.
Oh dear.
We're going to start with some interesting facts about menstrual cycles, because the average age that we begin our periods is around the age of 12, and the average age to finish having periods and menstrual cycles is 51. So that is approximately 400 menstrual cycles, 400 periods that you will experience in your lifetime, which if you're somebody, it's a bloody lot. And if you're someone who has difficult ones, problematic ones,
then you're going to know it's a lot.
You really are going to know about it. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle awareness has really changed, I think, over the last, not long, really, probably the last 5 years. It seems to be that we're having a lot more conversations about menstrual cycle health, about the ways that you can manage your menstrual cycles. Because I guess this idea from, you know, if I think about it personally, how I experienced my cycles when I was younger, I had no idea what they were. I had no idea really what was happening. I didn't really put 2 and 2 together, which is not surprising, but I didn't really understand that a period was a result of ovulation. I didn't really understand that this menstrual cycle was all about your fertility. And I definitely did not understand this idea that your menstrual cycle has a part and a role to play in all other aspects of your life, whether it's your digestive system, your immune system, your nervous system, your sleep, you know, what you're wearing on a day-to-day basis. It's like the impact of it is so huge, and it's actually so,
it really is.
It goes beyond your fertility. And I think that this education around that and awareness around that is definitely changing. Do you think the same, or do we just spend our lives in Instagram circles where all we talk about is menstrual cycle? So we think that's what everyone talks about.
I think it's a bit of both. I definitely think the conversation has like really broadened a lot in recent years, and then you see things like, is it Scotland that now like they have to have free period products in schools, and so like the conversation is definitely changing. But I think there's much further to go past being like, rather than us having to hide that we have periods and like hiding your tampon up your sleeve kind of thing, there's the education piece to come as well. Like you just saying about how not appreciating or knowing that a period is a result of having ovulated and not conceiving. Like I don't think I knew that until like relatively recent years, that like without having ovulated, you're not having a true menstrual period. And like all the other ways it can impact you as well. Like I've talked, but well, not on this podcast, but on Instagram and things, about like my experience with the menstrual cycle, and how with having PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is like a very severe type of PMS, and then also having mental health issues, that like the way that they can collide, and like that's had a massive impact on my life. And it's very much related to my menstrual cycle. And So yeah, it can be way beyond your fertility, or fertility if you're viewing that of being your ability to conceive, because I think often people think fertility and go, well, I don't want to have a baby yet, so that doesn't impact me. It's like, that's not true. Your fertility, if you're having a menstrual cycle, is likely impacting, or if it's not optimal, if your menstrual cycle is not optimal, then it's likely having an impact on other areas of your life as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we see in clinic a lot is that people, the issues that we see is that people who were teenagers who started having menstrual cycle issues and went to their GP or their sexual health clinic, and they were often put on contraception as a way of like regulating their cycle. And you know, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's one that we struggle with, because in many ways, and for lots of people that we see in clinic, they say, and it worked, you know, the sort of general kind of story that we hear is, I had problems as a teenager. I went to the GP or wherever, I was put on the pill, and then I was on the pill, and I went on the pill and it sorted out my periods. My periods were not a problem, and I stayed on it for 15 years. And then often they are usually in their 30s, and they come off and they find that a lot of those problems, you know, that were happening in their teenage years come back. And if you are 35 and you're trying to get pregnant, it can take a couple of years for those issues to sort themselves out. You know, there's things that you need to do, or they don't sort themselves out, and then you sort of move into the world of assisted conception quite quickly. And so I think a big thing that we talk about and we want to try and promote is this idea of understanding your cycle at all different stages of your life, so you can make informed decisions about your fertility, and you can do something about it before you're ready to conceive, because you will have that knowledge that, okay, I might have issues. There might be things that we need to sort out. There might be things that need to be addressed. I might need to have surgery, or I might need to have like diet changes, or you know, different kinds of medical intervention, because there's loads of things that you can do. But it's a very, and if you're doing that late 20s, early 30s, that's a very different place to be than if you're late 30s, you know, and you're ready to conceive, because it's so much harder, and time is not on your side, because we know that age is one of the biggest factors when it comes to fertility outcomes. So this idea that the pill regulates your cycle is kind of misinformation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's just not true. Like when you're on the pill or like hormonal contraception, they're very deliberately interfering with your menstrual cycle, and either like stopping you from ovulating. Well, a lot of them stop you from ovulating. They like change your cervical mucus, so it's like not fertile, and very deliberately changing what would happen in a natural menstrual cycle. And when you have a period, or what a lot of people refer to as like, oh, well, I'm having my period, when they're on the pill, it's actually what we would call a withdrawal bleed, which is where you're not having those hormones, and that can then cause like some shedding of the lining of the uterus to happen. But that's not because you're having a period. I think we mentioned before that if you don't ovulate, then you're not having a true menstrual period. So then this is a withdrawal bleed, and that's what you see when people are on the pill. So sure, it's making you have a regular bleed, but it's not a regular period. Because it changes it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this idea that it regulates your cycle. It's
not a cycle
the wrong
anymore.
Term, because it's not a cycle, is it? A cycle is, you know, a menstrual cycle is, you have a period, your body ovulates, you have a period again, and that is the cycle of your, that is the cycle of your cycle, but that is what happens in your cycle. But if you're on the pill, then you usually do not ovulate. So if you're not ovulating, you're not having a cycle. There isn't a cycle of life that is happening within the reproductive system. It basically is flatlining, and you've got synthetic hormones that are flatlining your you know, reproductive health or your reproductive system, and that is a very different place to be. And I think a thing that we see a lot is that when people stop taking the pill as well,
I wanted to talk about this.
It can take a lot of time, can't it, for your cycle to come back? And I know there is a lot of evidence where, you know, the general kind of information is that the pill does not affect your future fertility. And in many ways, that is completely right. I'm not disagreeing with that. But for some people, that first year after you stop taking the pill, it can really mess it up. And it can take... I've worked with people, it's taken a year for their cycle to come back, and their cycle to come back when it's a fertile cycle. So, you know, they've had cycles that have been erratic, or they might not have produced much cervical mucus. But in terms of what we would call a fertile cycle, it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. Really glad that you mentioned that. And like sort of piggybacking off of what you said of if you're on the pill and then, in terms of hormonally, it's kind of like you're flatlining. So then you take away the pill, and it's going to take time to see those like ebbs and flows of the different hormones to come back. And like all the research says like 6 to 12 cycles. That's not months, that's cycles. So if you have longer cycles, that can be more than a year. But 6 to 12 cycles for them to normalize and go back to kind of like a more optimal range. So like you were saying, you can have the cycle like cycles that are maybe erratic, or like there's not much cervical mucus, or the luteal phase is really short, and all of those things mean the cycle, it's not to say it's impossible to get pregnant, but it's not optimal for pregnancy to happen in. So it can take like 6 months, a year, a bit more depending on your cycles to get them in a really good place when you come off the pill. So this is why like we're talking about making informed decisions, because maybe you want to come off the pill earlier than you were thinking about, and like have a think about what methods of contraception, like barrier methods of contraception, or looking at fertility awareness from a birth control perspective, because it can be used as a method of birth control. I'd really recommend learning with someone if you're going to use it as a method of birth control. Because then that will give you the time to let your cycles normalize. So then when you're ready to conceive, you don't have to go through that whole process of being like, oh, well, now I've got to sort this out and I want to conceive right now. But actually, you'd be in a better place had you perhaps come off earlier.
And you had you had time on your side, because often I think what we see is that people are really panicking and they're feeling very anxious and they're feeling really stressed. And then that feeds into, you know, Googling on the internet and changing lots of things in life, and, you know, sort of limiting what you're eating and drinking, because, you know, it just becomes all consuming about this, you know, supporting your fertility. And I think if the sooner you can take control of that and understand it, and without feeling that pressure of time, like I don't have time, I'm this age, then I think the easier it is to go, you know, to give yourself time without the pressure, which can have a really big difference. And I also think it's, you know, the reason we're talking about this episode is we're talking about this idea of really understanding and knowing your menstrual cycle and what impacts it, and having that knowledge all the way through your life, because at each stage it informs your health, whether you want to conceive or not. So, you know, as a teenager, it's complicated, isn't it? Because going on the pill is a really good solution for lots and lots of people. It really works. It sorts out their skin. It sorts out their painful periods. It's, you know, if you're missing school, it can be amazing. And
I think there's like a time and a place for all different options, but
it's about being informed, isn't it? That, you know, every time you go in for a check-in with either your doctor or your nurse, and they're reviewing your contraception, it's like, you know, you have a conversation about, well, maybe it might be worth coming off and seeing whether your periods are still heavy. Maybe it's worth looking at all the lifestyle bits of information that you and me love and, you know, advocate for so much, because we see so many amazing changes. It might be that when you're 18, you don't want to do those things. But at 25, you might think, actually, there's time in my life where I can dedicate some time to getting good sleep, good exercise, eating well, drinking water, reducing inflammation, looking at my stress levels. You might be better placed to do that at that point of time. But I guess it's about all those touch points of being reminded, so that you're not in that place that we see way too often in our clinics, where people are up against the clock and they're feeling very, very pressured, and they're saying to us, why did nobody tell me this sooner? You know, why am I now 35 and I'm just realizing that my heavy painful periods at 15 were actually a sign that something wasn't right, and that could now be impacting my fertility. And that's why we're here doing this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think we'll go into it in more detail, but just yeah, when you're saying about like, well, my painful periods at 15, like, why did no one tell me that? I think there's such a narrative around menstrual cycle that because people experience PMS and pain, that like that's normal and like that's a given. And it's like, no, no, that's a sign that there are things to be looked into, and perhaps lifestyle changes that can have like a really transformative effect, but also perhaps like, if you have really painful periods and that's never investigated, like that's exactly why it takes for a lot of women 8 years or more to get diagnosed with endometriosis.
Yeah. And you know, and going on the pill might be a temporary solution to that problem. But if that's your experience that you've had since a teenager and you get to that point in your life when you want to get pregnant, then it can be, we know it can be a massive barrier to your fertility. And so the sooner that is investigated, the better. And, you know, that information should be given continuously, so that when you're ready to hear that, because you might not want to hear that. I certainly wouldn't have wanted any of that information, you know, until I was in my 30s. So it's just about making sure that people have more understanding of that continuously through their life, so they know what is and what isn't normal. And it's a bit like, you know, I'm at the other end of the spectrum where I'm going through the perimenopause, and it's about, you know, again, it's having now known my cycle and known how my hormones work and how it impacts me, I am like on it for the perimenopause. I have been looking out for the perimenopause for the last 5 years, and I am taking it down. Like it is not taking me down. I am taking it down because
take it down.
Because I'm lucky enough that I'm really informed. So I know what symptoms to look out for. I'm really on it in terms of, you know, I know that it could be any symptom, from my sleep to my mental health, to my digestion, to my energy levels. You know, all of those things could be changing in my life, and all of them could have a hormonal element to them. It's not just I've got bad sleep. That could actually be a hormonal issue, not a sleep issue, or have a hormonal element. So I think it's about understanding that is really important.
Yeah. I agree. Completely agree. There's not a lot to add on. We thought it would be really good to walk you through what an optimal menstrual cycle would look like. Starting from your period, so day one, like we spoke about in the last episode, being the first day you get like the full flow of your period, and we'd expect you to bleed for like 3 to 5 days, and there be a clear end to the period. So ideally, it doesn't kind of slowly taper off with spotting. There's like quite a clear end to it. Then, so this first part of your cycle, from when you start your period up until ovulation, is called your follicular phase. And that can really vary in length. It's the thing that will kind of change how long your whole menstrual cycle can be. So that's where we see a lot of the variation is in this phase. And ovulation, we kind of would expect to happen from about day 10 to day 21. And then Hannah, do you want to take over from ovulation?
Yeah, so ovulation is obviously, interestingly, the main event of your menstrual cycle. So we always think about it as being your period, but really your whole cycle is there to support the moment of ovulation. So ovulation, again, as Katie says, this can move around, but on average, we like to see it between about day 10, day 11, up to day 20. And once you have ovulated and your follicle has released the egg, you are then into the luteal phase of your cycle. So the luteal phase of your cycle is supported by progesterone, and that follicle that released your egg becomes the corpus luteum, which is a temporary gland which produces the progesterone. So, and this is why we talk about this idea of, if you're not ovulating, then you're not having a menstrual cycle, because if you're not ovulating, your follicle isn't forming the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum isn't producing progesterone. And progesterone is what supports and holds your uterus lining in place should there be any potential embryo, to, you know, provide that nice pillow, I like to think of it, of the endometrial lining for implantation to happen. This is the luteal phase, and the luteal phase should be lasting. We like to see it over 12 days. So over 12 days, we think is enough time for egg and sperm to meet, for the embryo to move from the fallopian tube down into the uterus, and for implantation to be fully secured. If you start to bleed before that point, there is the idea that the uterus lining comes away, and with that, the any potential embryo and implantation and pregnancy. So over 12 days is the ideal time. And then again, we like to see you going into your period if you're not pregnant with no spotting, because this is suggesting that your progesterone levels have been nice and high, and then they're dropping quickly to allow your period to come again. So we've rattled through that, Katie.
Yeah, gone straight through. I think just one more thing to mention. We mentioned lots of numbers and days and things, but from one period to the next, so one full menstrual cycle, ideally we'd like to see that like 24 to 35 days. If you're kind of averaging around that number, like having a rate, so say if your periods are regular at like 26 days, like that can still be a very healthy cycle. Just because it's not the 28 days that everyone talks about doesn't mean it's not a good cycle if there's all these other factors that are in the right brackets.
Yes, and I think what's important to remember is like your fingerprint, like the sound of your voice, like your eyes, whatever. We are all unique and different. They're no two the same, and it's the same with menstrual cycles. Everybody experiences them differently. And what we're talking about here is an optimum. I guess it's kind of like what we want to give is like a blueprint, so that you can
that's a good way of putting it.
You can compare yours to it and see, okay, mine's roughly like that, so that you know that yours is okay, or more importantly, you know when it's not okay. Because as we've referred to, there is this thing that, you know, if everybody in your family has heavy periods, you just assume that a heavy period is a normal part of having a menstrual cycle. And we are really here to tell you it's not normal. It needs to be investigated, and that there are things to do that you can do about it, and that it could be impacting your fertility. So this is kind of like a blueprint. And the other thing to say about that is that your cycle can change every month as well.
Yeah.
And again, that is not unusual. It's not doesn't mean that it's problematic. It might just be, I know some people who come on at the same time every single month, which I just think is like, I don't know, it's bonkers. But, you know, maybe that's, you know, that's just the way that their biology works. They come on the same day, same time, pretty much every single month. And other people, it changes all the time. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just that, you know, we're all different. So, you know, this really is an optimum for you to compare to. Katie, and we are going to go through each of the next subsequent episodes is going to really take a deep dive into each section that we've talked about. So there are really 4 parts of the menstrual cycle, and we're going to take a deep dive and a big look into them. So you've got more information and a good understanding, we hope, by the end of it. But Katie, do you want to flag like a couple of sort of things for people to look out for now? So things that they might, you know, that might indicate there's something going on, or that it might be impacting their fertility, sort of big cycle issues, that are the big things that we ask about in clinic, I guess.
Sure. So just at the end there, we were talking about like the regularity of periods, and if your periods are very irregular, so you're getting like a period once every 2 or 3 months, or you have like one very short cycle, then one very, very long cycle. If they're a bit all over the place, then like that's something we definitely want to be investigating and having a look at. So making sure you're adding that into your tracking of like when your cycle starts every time. And each of the things I'm going to mention as being like things to sort of flag and look out for, make sure you're adding that into any tracking that you're doing. So another thing would be like pain levels. If you're experiencing a lot of pain with your period, then like note that down. And that again is something to be investigated. I had someone message me on Instagram recently saying like, oh, is like vomiting a normal part of like your period? And I was like, no, it's not. So yeah, knowing that like in terms of pain, we might expect some like mild cramping when your period starts. That's really all it should be, like mild cramping that doesn't interfere with your life. If you're having a lot of pain, it's something to be flagged.
Yeah.
If you're seeing no cervical mucus, then that is something to look out for, because that could really be impacting your fertile window. And like the heaviness of your period as well is something to really kind of keep an eye out for. If you're having to very regularly change your sanitary products, then again, something to be investigated.
Yeah, brilliant. So hopefully now you've got a good sort of brief overview, and you've got some idea of if any of these issues are applying to you, then it really is something to think about and take to your GP and push for further investigations, which is why, you know, at the episode 1, we talked about tracking, because I tell you what happens, because this happens to me, is that you forget.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you can easily forget, like so for example, if you're not tracking, you don't know that your cycle's regular, because I can barely remember what I had for my breakfast, never mind when my last period was due. So if you're not writing it down, it sounds like really silly to say that, but it is so easy to forget, because we're busy, and your cycle moves on, and it might be that you're in terrible pain for one day, and then you kind of move on, and you're like, oh well, that's just my one day of really bad pain, and you kind of dismiss it, belittle it a little bit, and excuse me, crack on. Yeah. And actually, if you've got a record that every single month you experience pain, you take painkillers and it doesn't work, and you take that information to your GP, that's really good information that's hopefully going to get you, referred to the right people quicker. Because sometimes what happens is that you can go and you're like, well, I think it's a bit painful, but it's about having as much evidence as possible to really, because this is the thing with endometriosis. So many people are dismissed, they're not taken seriously. And so we really, really believe that tracking is a way of having as much information and as a power to get yourself heard as possible. So
Oh, another thing to add into your tracking, which I forgot to mention, even though we just discussed mentioning it, was PMS symptoms. So like if you're having regular like mood changes, and also like bloating and breast tenderness is like a type of PMS as well. Noting that into your tracking as well, because that's a hormonal issue and can be resolved with various changes. So adding that into your tracking as well. Okay.
Thank you, Katie. We are going to be back next week. And next week, we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk all about your period. We're going to take a deep dive into your actual period. And we're going to be looking into it in more detail, because it is a really important marker of your health and your fertility. So we hope that you will join us for that. And look out for those signs. Keep tracking and let us know how you're getting on. Thanks so much, Katie.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have learned something helpful about your reproductive health and your fertility. If you would like to find out more information, then please come and join us in our free community on Facebook. We have tons of resources, access to our webinars, we do live Q&As, and it's a chance to connect with other people who are trying to conceive. The link to register is in our show notes, and we hope to see you there.